Welcome to episode 59 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by a 17-loss guy. It's December 29, 2022. The World Cup in Qatar has barely settled back into the archive, and football loses the man who for decades didn't just represent the game, he represented its possibility. Pelé passes at 82, and the global reaction tells you everything. This wasn't just a great player passing away, this was the game's most famous face. Today on the pod, we'll tell the story of who Pelé actually was, beyond the poster and the myth. Revisit the career facts that still feel unreal, Santos, the World Cups, and the numbers. Look at the moments that made him bigger than football, tours, diplomacy, America, and public life. And ask why Pelé became football's global language, not just Brazil's greatest athlete. We start with the most important thing to understand about Pelé. The mythology is real, but it also hides the human story. His name is Edson Arantes do Nascimento, and he was born on October 23, 1940. He grows up in a modest household and learns football the way millions do in Brazil, by improvising it. His father was a footballer himself, but due to injury, he struggled to make a living from the game. Young Pelé wasn't deterred, often using a sock stuffed with rags as a makeshift football. Even then, his talent was undeniable. At the age of 15, he joined Santos, a club that would become synonymous with his name and his genius. From the late 1950s into the 60s, Santos, not just winning, they're traveling, staging football as a global event, filling stadiums on other continents because Pelé is in town. That touring era matters because it's part of how football becomes truly worldwide before global broadcast did the job for it. And then there's the part that still doesn't sound like a real sentence. Pelé wins the World Cup 3 times, 1958, 62, and 70. No one else has done it. In 1958, he is the teenage supernova, a 17-year-old scoring 6 goals in the World Cup, including a hat-trick in the semi-final and 2 in the final against the hosts from Sweden. Goals that don't just win matches and Brazil's first World Cup title, they changed Brazil's place in football history. In 1962, the story is complicated. He gets injured early in the tournament, but Brazil still retain the title, and the legend grows anyway, because dynasties don't care about neat narratives. In 1970, he becomes something even rarer than a scorer, the center of gravity for a team that many still call the greatest international side ever assembled, an icon on the field, and a symbol for an era of color television, global audiences, and football as world theater. Now, because this is Pelé, you'll hear 1,281 goals, the famous total Pelé himself used, including friendlies and exhibition matches. But the widely cited official total is lower, because football in his era lived in a gray zone of semi-competitive tours, hybrid lineups, and matches that mattered culturally, but didn't always map cleanly onto modern statistical categories. That doesn't diminish Pelé, of course. It clarifies him. The point isn't whether a match was labeled official by today's database logic. The point is, Pelé played in an era when the superstar's job description included being football's traveling head of state. And nowhere is that clearer than his late career pivot. In 1975, Pelé joins the New York Cosmos, and whatever you think of the NASL, this is one of the most consequential sports marketing moves of the 20th century. A man who could have retired as a Brazilian monument instead chooses to become a football missionary in the American entertainment economy. His farewell match on October 1, 1977, Santos versus Cosmos, one half in white, one half in his old colors, is staged as a symbol, roots and global reach in the same afternoon. Now widen that lens again, because Pelé's influence is not just cultural, it becomes institutional. He steps into public life in Brazil and into global advocacy roles, including work connected to the United Nations as a goodwill ambassador in the early 1990s. Pelé's influence didn't stop when he hung up his boots. His famous quote, "Football is the beautiful game," became the tagline for a sport loved by millions. And you'll hear me repeat this quote often, because it's so true. FIFA named Pelé the player of the century, along with Diego Maradona, and even today, the debate over whether he was the greatest of all time remains a constant topic of discussion. An anecdote that always comes to mind is Pelé's meeting with Nelson Mandela in 1995. Mandela, just released from decades of imprisonment under apartheid, greeted Pelé not as a political figure or an activist, but as a fan, saying, To meet you is to meet soccer itself. Pelé's legacy extended far beyond the pitch. It touched people everywhere. You can argue about how effective celebrity diplomacy is, but Pelé understood something that most athletes only stumble into. Fame is a tool, and if you treat it well, you can widen the sport's footprint. That's part of why, today, football is not a European sport exported elsewhere. No, it's a global language spoken with local accents. You may have heard the Nigeria anecdote that a civil war ceasefire was declared so people could watch Pelé. It's been repeated for decades, including in serious media, but researchers have challenged the claim, suggesting the story grew into a parable and may have occurred away from the core fighting. Here's what matters either way. Pelé became the kind of figure the world wanted that story to be true about. In the public imagination, he wasn't only a footballer, he was football's proof that joy could outrank politics for 90 minutes. So what does Pelé mean to us on this day in 2022? Well, on every day. First, he is the clearest example of football as shared memory. Pelé isn't just highlights, he's stories passed down, a name your grandfather said with reverence, a grainy clip that still feels like magic. Second, he is the bridge between football's local roots and football's global era. Santos tours, World Cups, America. Pelé didn't wait for globalization. He invented it. Third, his legacy is bigger than greatest of all time arguments. Because GOAT debates are about ranking, Pelé is about reach. He made football feel like it belonged to everyone, including the places that were told they were outside the game's center. And because this episode airs while Africa is living another AFCON, that matters. The game Pelé helped globalize is now fully multipolar. Talent, passion, identity, and belief spread across every confederation. On this day in 2022, Pelé didn't just leave football. He left it infinitely larger than he found it. Ore, we are eternally grateful. That's all for episode 59 of OTD, Pelé, and the rare kind of sporting life that becomes global culture. If you got a favorite Pelé story, not just a goal, but a memory, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. Subscribe to the pod, rate us 5 stars, and share this with a friend so the algorithm helps us climb the league table. Tomorrow, in episode 60, we stay in Brazil and jump to December 30, 2000, the João Avalanche Cup, Vasco da Gama versus Sao Caetano, and the suspension that turned the final into chaos. See you then.